Good morning, Bills Mafia. That red light is on, which means this week's episode is officially live. And thank you all so much for tuning in today. We got a great episode. And as you know, if you've been watching the show, I've been covering a plethora of different position groups. Last time it was linebackers, other time it was defensive line, other time it was the wide receivers and the running backs. But there is one position that truly needs to be talked about in advance of training camp. And that, on today's episode of Under Review, is the one, the only, the polarizing Mr. Josh Allen. Let's go.
Previous play will go under review.
And once again, everybody, thank you so much again for tuning into this week's episode of Under Review. My name is Joe DeRosa. You can find me on Twitter at show_DeRosa. Today's theme is why Joming, because I got the jersey on, Bruce. We're talking about Josh Allen, and it was only fitting that I made that my subtitle. And for all of you in the chat, you know him well. He's everyone's favorite ethereal blue floating orb that appears on your screens from time to time. He is the one, the only, Mr. Bruce exclusive himself, Bruce Nolan. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so happy to have you here.
Mr. DeRosa, it is happy to, it's a good time. It's a good time to be here. You know, I feel like I'm everybody's favorite blue ethereal floating orb, but I'm also simultaneously everyone's least favorite blue ethereal floating orb because I don't know how many blue ethereal floating orbs people are typically making friends with these days, but the list has got to be fairly short. I mean, it's me and that, that one other guy, but I who likes him.
Yeah. Well, listen, you, that one other guy, and all the guys at Area 51, right? But anyways, we are talking about Josh Allen. I appreciate your time. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. Don't want to ruin the club. We are talking about Josh Allen. I'm excited for this episode. Really wanted to do this for a while, but I figured it was something I wanted to save best for last, just because you could talk about him. He's probably the most, divisive point of conversation, not even amongst Bills fans, but amongst the NFL, just in how people tend to evaluate him. And when we look at Josh Allen, we look at a lot of his strengths and also his weaknesses in advance of the 2023 season. And we're just trying to evaluate how we'll think he'll do, if it could be an MVP caliber season, if it could be similar to this past year where it was still pretty damn good, but not MVP caliber. But Bruce, before we begin, I promised last week in my comment section on one of my videos that I would shout out the person who was able to do this, and they did this. So if you can all see the screen right here, I tend to do a thing on this show if you're a regular here. And that is a word I say or a phrase I say really often, which is for me personally. It's like my springboard term. It helps me go back to my point. So I asked someone if they could figure out how many times I said it in the last episode. Mr. Jim counted for me. He got every time code here. He also included the half to me personally and counted 5.5 times. So I promised I would shout you out. Jim, thank you for counting this. If I do it again, I am happy to be counted again, but I wanted to give him his flowers. Now, Bruce, let's get to the nitty gritty of today's episode. And I'm going to ask you the first question for today are just give me your thoughts on Josh Allen's 2022, what you thought were his high points, his low points, where he was strong and where he showed weakness in your eyes.
I think Josh Allen continued the trajectory of the idea that he's going to continue to be a top 3 at most conservative quarterback in the NFL. It's reached the point where when you don't get a game from Josh Allen that's elite, it's now a talking point. That's what we're at. Early in 2020, when Josh Allen came out like gangbusters, the question is, okay, at what point are we going to see a non-elite game from Josh Allen? And then how long is that slump going to last? And so now when you have a non-elite game, when you're going through the storylines of a specific game, and one of the narrative points is Josh Allen didn't play at an extremely high level, that's now a talking point. And so at the very beginning of the upturn, it's now a wow, what a game Josh Allen had. Wow happens less frequently now. And wow happens less frequently because the wow has now become he didn't play at an elite level, not he did play at an elite level. And that's a turning point that I don't think we really talk about very much is that what is this statistical outlier? What is the feeling outlier? What is the narrative outlier? Because every single game has its own little ecosystem. And so one of the great things about football, and one of the things that we love about football, is that the games take place over the course of a weekend. And then you have an entire week to digest the storylines. See, in other sports like baseball or basketball, you have stretches of time that you evaluate. You have, this week or this month, and there's this big sample size. But in football, the sample size is one, and every single game has its own storyline. And so what you see from Josh Allen, because 2021 objectively was not as good as 2020. 2020, there's a very reasonable argument to be made that for Josh Allen, unless Aaron Rodgers goes absolutely nuclear, Josh Allen is the MVP of the NFL in 2020. I think it's a very, very reasonable statement to make. I don't think that's hyperbolic in any sort of way. And then 2021 wasn't quite as good as 2020. And 2022 was better than 2021. So there is this question. We kind of have a tendency to forget narratives, but one of the narratives at the end of 2021 was, well, Josh Allen regressed. Well, yeah, he regressed because 2020 was bonkers. Of course he regressed because 2020, it wasn't part of a trajectory on the downward turn. But now that 2022 is over, we can go, it's pretty obvious. We have 3 seasons now of Josh Allen being really, really good. In my opinion, I'd rank him 2020, 2022, 2021. And the fact that I have 2022 at number 2 of the last 3 seasons with the elbow injury, that says something. So for me, when you're looking at Josh Allen and you say, okay, what did he do well? Well, he continued his play of being an elite quarterback. Now, when it comes to what did he not do well, it's really hard to separate out 3 different things when it comes to Josh Allen and what you would like to see him improve on moving forward. The first thing it's hard to separate out is Josh Allen and the elbow injury, because he openly said that there are certain types of throws that were pretty difficult for him after that. You see a lot of these quick hair throws where the platform has to change and you put a little bit more torque on your elbow. Those throws, the smoke screens and things like that, those become a little bit more problematic. So that alters the throwing angle. It alters what your willingness is to call those sort of plays. And then the second thing is hard to separate out is Josh Allen and Ken Dorsey. Those 2 things are hard to separate out because objectively we look at the numbers and go, I mean, Bill's offense was pretty good, but subjectively you kind of feel like they left some meat on the bone last year. And there was a little bit of an ADOT issue later in the year. Obviously the ADOT started to trickle up. It started to become a little bit YOLO in the offense. And you go, okay, how much of that was Josh Allen and how much of that was the play calling and how much of that was the elbow? It's really difficult to parse it because of those 3 factors, like the Triforce, right? They're all leaning on each other and you're going, okay, how much of this, it's your own plurality pie. How much of it's Allen? How much of it's Dorsey? How much of it's the elbow? And that becomes really difficult. So we know we had things we'd like to see more of. We know we would like to see more consistency. We know we'd like to see, him taking the checkdowns, getting through the progressions a little bit easier. But we also know that Ken Dorsey didn't do as good of a job as Brian Daboll of marrying up route concepts to have them locked in. There was a lot of option routes. There was a lot of wide receiver progression. And so because of that, that slows down your reads when you're a quarterback, because you don't have the route locked in, which means you need to wait for it to manifest before you move on. So when you say Josh Allen, part of that's always going to be Ken Dorsey. And it's just a really difficult thing to talk about because it's so hard to isolate the play of Josh Allen from Ken Dorsey and of Josh Allen from the elbow. So as I'm sitting and looking at this, I go, yes, there are some things I'd like to see different moving forward, right? I like to see a few more of the routes locked in so you can get through the progressions faster. If you can get through the progressions faster, you'll probably take more checkdowns. If you take more checkdowns, the ADOT will take care of itself. So obviously that's one of those things I want to see. But I cannot tell you exactly what percentage of that is Allen and what percentage of that's Dorsey, which makes this a really complicated and nuanced conversation.
Yes. So just to address that first, I agree to the extent that Dorsey can improve in his route concepts. I think that's something I talked about with Ant a few weeks ago. He's not above criticism in that regard. I do think it helps Allen out a lot when you can get creative and get these guys open in space. However, if you look at certain games, there's plenty of examples too where Allen leaves meat on the bone himself, and you have wide open Dawson Knox and you have wide open Stephon Diggs, and he's unable to hit them. So I do think where that kind of comes from is not only with the Ken Dorsey issue, but like you addressed, Bruce, with his elbow injury and maybe this over dependence on the explosive, efficient play, because kind of that myriad of short or intermediate throws is harder to do when your elbow's messed up. And I've brought that up on the show, and I'm very glad you did. People forget how difficult it is when you have an elbow injury as a quarterback to kind of make those angle throws, because when you're putting your arm at a certain angle, it hurts. And not only does it hurt, but it affects your strength, it affects your precision, it affects everything. And you could go back to certain games in the middle of the year, maybe against Cleveland or against Detroit, really that run of post-elbow injury Allen, where he just did not look sharp at all. And you could see that there was just this absence of any sort of productivity in the short to intermediate part of the field. And it was concerning, but we all knew why. And yet, despite all that, 2022 was his second best year of his career. And just to go in order of how you kind of approached it, when you mentioned it before about how we'll notice a Josh Allen blunder game or a not elite game. So let's talk about maybe that first New England game in 2020, right? Allen still had a fantastic year, but that definitely wasn't his best game. But, you know, we don't really talk about that as much because in that year, that was Allen becoming a star. There was still this kind of, at least from the fans and maybe around the NFL, this idea that Allen was ascending, that he's allowed to have bad games, that the good will outweigh the bad. And by the end of the year, we'll look at that and that will be our true evaluator. And that's what happened. And it resulted in Allen being, I think it was third in MVP voting, if I'm not mistaken. Then you go to 2021. And because 2020 was such a great year, you expect the same thing. And 2021 in a vacuum was not a bad season for Allen. It was a very good year for Allen. There was just a rough stretch. And that made people think he regressed. And like you said, Bruce, he did, but not in the type of way where you're talking about it being concerning or it being a Russell Wilson in Denver situation where we're talking about Allen might be out of the league in 2 years. We were talking about Allen had a great year, but was not consistent. And then 2022 happens. And I have his stats right here. 407 completed passes on 648 attempts. He had just under a 63%. If you include rushing yards, and I have this accounting for playoffs, Bruce, he had over 5,000 all-purpose yards. 5,000. That doesn't happen by accident. And with playoffs, 38 touchdowns. Now, his turnovers were the problem. And that's been a problem that's lingered pretty much his entire career. However, I'm looking at these numbers, and I'm not saying to you that he regressed. And I don't understand where that narrative comes from. And I think this is what happens when you become a star in the NFL. I think this is what happened to Patrick Mahomes in 2021 when he went through that also brutal stretch. Fans will notice when the elite quarterbacks do not perform at an elite level much more than the budding young quarterback. Let's talk about maybe Tua not doing the same thing, because in that way, you're not expecting them to be elite. But now when you get that status like a Josh Allen 2020, that's the expectation. That's what fans want from you. And when you don't perform that way, there you go. It's either regression or you're a fake or a fraud. No, I think it's just this standard that you've set for quarterbacks, not you, Bruce, but the average fan, is semi-unattainable. And that's not an excuse to say Allen's not elite. It's not an excuse to say you shouldn't expect greatness from a quarterback, but to understand that stat lines are going to fluctuate. Not every game's going to be dominant. Sometimes you run into a brick wall of a defense and have a hard time getting your passes off, have a hard time game planning. It happens. And I think that's why when it comes to Josh Allen and the discourse around him, I agree with you that while you might call it a slight regression, it's not a concerning one, and he still had a great 2022. I agree with your ranking of his seasons as well, 2020, 2022, 2021. And honestly, you look at last season, and you also brought up the fact that subjectively it felt like they left a little meat on the bone. Yes, but again, that elbow injury has to be talked about. And despite that, the team was still a top 10 DVOA offense, even in the second half of the year. They were still an efficient offense. They were still one of the top point scoring offenses in the league, despite being handcuffed by this kind of all or nothing approach, maybe because of injury, maybe because of a first year play caller. I don't know. But what I will say is that makes me confident for this season. And Bruce, I'm going to ask you, your opinion on what I'm about to say, but it makes me confident for 2022 that despite everything you saw this past season, they were still a top 10 offense. They were still putting points on the board, even though it wasn't as pretty, it wasn't as methodical, it wasn't as all over the place. They were still finding the end zone. They were still putting up anywhere from 25 to 35 points a game. And they still looked like a competent offense that unfortunately ran out of gas. So what is your thought on your optimism or potential not optimism for the next season?
I think that Ken Dorsey being a first-time play caller last year is something that gives you room for optimism by itself, because there is a higher likelihood, in my opinion, that Ken Dorsey figures his stuff out and gets a little better than there is that NFL defenses catch up to Dorsey, because NFL defenses catch up to offensive coordinators real fast, because they study your tape from last week. It's not like they'll figure out players a little bit longer, because players obviously, they can do a lot of different things. They can play outside structure. But as far as the play calls go, that's actually a much more limited target if you're trying to catch up to somebody from a defensive standpoint. And so you can catch up to offensive coordinators fast, but do you have a growth mindset? I don't think Sean McDermott hires you if you don't. It's that simple. I think if you don't have a growth mindset, if you're not trying to constantly be 1% better tomorrow than you were today, I don't think you get a job. No matter how much Josh Allen likes you, I don't think you get a job unless you have that mentality. And Sean McDermott has said that Ken Dorsey has that mentality. So I think that's probably a reason for optimism. The second thing is that it almost feels like they're specifically targeting things on the offense that they could do better. One of the things that we talked a lot about is that the absence of peak Cole Beasley has a significant impact on this offense, because having that secondary short and intermediate option that you can get to and trust that he's going to be where he's supposed to be. Isaiah McKenzie was never going to be that guy. I know that there was a ton of hype around him last year at training camp, and I kept trying to pump the brakes and it didn't work, because people were often running that Isaiah McKenzie in year 6 was going to suddenly become, Cole Beasley. And I think that Jamison Crowder's injury probably had a bigger effect on what this offense was going to look like in 2022 than we probably wanted to admit, because having the player like that, who is going to keep you on schedule, and that was the difference between 2022 and 2020, was how often the offense stayed on schedule. It was how often they could get you the 3rd and 7 and by throwing the ball 8 yards versus 3rd and 7 by throwing the ball 16 yards or bombing it 28 yards down the field to Gabe Davis. I think that is the thing that separates 2022 from 2020. And I think you see that reflected in some of Josh Allen's advanced statistics. If you look at his, QB stew, for example, his QBR is 2. He's second in QBR. He's 6th in NEA. He's 4th in EPA per play. He's 5th in DVOA. He's number 1 in PFF grade, but he's 12th in CPOE. He's 8th in passer rating. So the things that are pulled up by him scrambling for a first down on 3rd and 6, that's the QBR and the PFF grade and the EPA per play. Those are the highest metrics for him. I would prefer that he didn't have to do that. I would like for him to not have to run for 8 yards on 3rd and 7. I'll take it. Don't get me wrong. Let's do it. But you actually saw less of it in 2020 because you had a reliable secondary and tertiary option in Cole Beasley. So when you're targeting that as an offseason, you're thinking, gosh, Dalton Kincaid sounds like a player like that we could target as a secondary, tertiary option in the short and intermediate parts of the field. Deontay Hardy is a better receiver than Isaiah McKenzie was. And I was an Isaiah McKenzie fan in that specific role, not as a full-time slot receiver. And I think that the speed at which the Buffalo Bills signed Deontay Hardy and the fact that they were willing to potentially risk a compensatory pick by doing it speaks to the fact that I think they like Deontay Hardy. I think he's been basically left by his own devices this offseason because he's been overshadowed by a lot of the other acquisitions. I think the adjustments to the offensive line, the fact that they signed 2, not 1, but 2 powerful downhill backs. I think they're trying to get a little bit more well-rounded when it comes to the offense. And I think that having the short and intermediate options in the passing game, players who can get you yak. I think one of the things we don't talk about is that Dalton Kincaid and Deontay Hardy are both significant yak additions. I think all these things go to lessening the degree of difficulty for Josh Allen. You combine that with Ken Dorsey's first year to the second year jump, and I think that there's reason for optimism because it seems like they're targeting the things that need to be targeted to take this offense to the next level.
Agreed completely. And those were points I wanted to make as well, because I felt like, again, we talked about this over reliance on explosive plays and how much that had to do with Josh's elbow. It also had a lot to do with the fact that you had this slot receiver by committee going on, right? McKenzie earned that job in training camp. However, he did not hold the job. He did not do well enough in the regular season. There were plenty of plays that you wish he could take back. There were times where he did shine, but it wasn't consistent enough. And it was nowhere near to the level of Cole Beasley. And I was one of those people that thought when Crowder went down, I wanted to see what McKenzie had, but it made me a little more nervous for that because I felt like even though it was very early on in the season, I was starting to see Crowder and Allen develop that rapport that similar to how he and Beasley had it, not saying they're the same type of player, but more that they were establishing chemistry and that Allen was looking for his easy button. He was looking for that guy over the middle of the field, that person that on 3rd and 6 is making a first down or even gives you more options on those 3rd and shorts if you don't want to run the ball with Allen because you're not really too sure about your backs or your interior protection. Now, like you said, they've addressed all that. And when I talked about it with, I believe it was Ant when we were talking about it, we talked about just some of the patches they made to the offense and how it's indicative of kind of their new identity they're trying to establish this upcoming season. You talk about adding in more powerful interior protection with guys like Connor McGovern, and then you draft O'Cyrus Torrance, who's an absolute physical freak and a really good run protector to boot. You talk about the speed components when they add in a Deontay Hardy, but also a Trent Sherfield, who was also an exceptional run blocker. And what these moves scream to me is that this team is not only trying to make Josh Allen that pure pocket guy with the runs being want to, not have to type of option, but also that they want to run the ball more and want to run it more effectively and want to use it situationally where they don't feel like when it's a 3rd and 2, we have to bite our nails and hope that it works out and the protection holds up. It feels like, all this being said, these moves from Bean & Co. for Josh Allen feel like we want to take more off your plate. And that's a positive sign. And again, another reason to be optimistic going into the season, because now we feel like on paper with guys like Dalton Kincaid, who you can now run the 12 personnel with Dawson Knox and have him slide across the middle of the field while Knox goes up. When you can run these different types of personnel groupings or 11.5, where you have Kincaid on the field, but you still run your receivers, it almost feels like, assuming they could stay healthy and that this protection holds up, and I know that's a big assumption, they could do whatever they want to you offensively. And that's why I get excited. And that's why I feel like this team, and specifically Josh Allen, could be poised for a very big year and a very efficient year. But Bruce, you did bring up one thing that I do want to talk to you about because it is actually one of my questions on my note sheet, and it's about Josh Allen running. A huge point of conversation, something I brought up on my Twitter, something I know you've talked about, everybody's talked about. But my question to you, Bruce, is can you really ask Josh Allen to run less? And if your answer is yes, I'd like to hear you explain why.
You can't ask him to run less. You cannot ask him to decide to run less. There's a very, very different meaning in those two statements. You ask him to run less by not needing to call as many designed run plays when you need to get 3rd and 3 or 2nd and 1. You can do that. But Josh Allen's Josh Allen, man. Like, you can't, if you call a pass play on 1st and 10, which you should be doing a lot, you should be passing on early downs. If you do that and Josh Allen sees man coverage and he looks down the field and it's blocked up and it's cover 0 and he breaks contain and sees wide open grass in the middle of the field, you cannot ask a player like that to not run down the middle of the field, jump over a linebacker, bulldoze a safety and get 20 yards, get up, point at the crowd, throw his hands up in the air, signal for a first down and scream, "Let's go." You cannot do it. That's just who he is. And you shouldn't ask him to not do that. The thing you can do to best help Josh Allen is to make it so you don't have to do it. If you think as a play caller, it's 3rd and 1, if we don't call a Josh Allen run, we're not going to get this. That's what you can do to help Josh Allen. It's to eliminate the idea that you need to, because your only other option, you feel there's a significant gap in success rate between if we call a run play to a running back and if we call a quarterback sneak. Now, 3rd and 1 is probably not the right example because I'd probably call mostly quarterback sneaks on that too. So let's say 3rd and 2, because quarterback sneaks from a success, we can go into math all day long, but quarterback sneaks on a success rate when it comes to 3rd and 1 and 4th and run, they're just infinitely higher than most other run plays. So you should probably be calling them regardless. But let's say it's 3rd and 2, and you could either call a pass or you can call a run. If you want to call a run, you should be able to say, I think we can get this with Damian Harris. I think we can get this with Latavius Murray. That's the method by which I want to help Josh Allen out when it comes to running. I don't want to help Josh Allen out by handcuffing him to the pocket. That's not interested. I just want to have a viable alternative that we're comfortable calling, because the Buffalo Bills were not a bad running team last year. They just didn't feel comfortable calling it enough. And so I think that they called it in areas where they believed they could be successful. When they had light boxes, they did the things that they needed to do. Devin Singletary consistently had good numbers running against light boxes. It's because they ran against light boxes. That's the reason why. And historically, if you looked at the line between Devin Singletary and a player like Zach Moss, right? Zach Moss was their designated, okay, we have a heavy box, but we're going to run into it anyway. There was a line of delineation between the percentage of runs that Devin Singletary had against light boxes and the percentage of runs that Zach Moss had against light boxes. It was very, very different. Zach Moss was the designated, we're going to run it anyway guy, and he just wasn't effective. But they want a guy they can run against heavy boxes. They signed 2 of them this year, and Damian Harris and Latavius Murray. They want a guy because they know James Cook is not that guy. James Cook is not we have a heavy box, we're going to run this anyway. Now you have O'Cyrus Torrence. You have a healthier Spencer Brown recovering from a back injury, and you have not 1, but 2 different running backs that you can utilize for that function. And I think they're going to keep Reggie Gilliam. I'd be surprised if he wasn't a part of this team next year. So I think the best thing you can do to help Josh Allen is just to have something else that you feel comfortable going to. It's not telling him to run less. It's needing him to have to run less, if that makes sense.
Absolutely does. And it breeds optimism when you bring it up that way. Because when they brought in Damian Harris, when they brought in Latavius Murray, and you think about the personnel that they've included, like I mentioned before, it feels like this team is not only going to run more effectively, but run more often. And that's not to say that they're going to remove the percentage of Josh Allen's going to be throwing less than they run. Never. You will never do that when you have a franchise quarterback. Josh Allen will be taking a majority of the snaps, he will be or a majority of the passing snaps, but they can and they will run more effectively. Again, you alluded to it in your comment that they ran well last year. They did run effectively last year. They had the capability to do it when they had the light boxes, which a majority of the time, that's when they decided to run. I think when you include a Damian Harris and a Latavius Murray and adding in that power physical component, which is something you haven't truly seen from the Buffalo Bills offense over the past few years, it's going to make them a much more difficult team to defend against. Because now, if you have this ability where on your 3rd and shorts, or even your 3rd and intermediates against heavy boxes, or if they do decide to throw that defense at you and they're able to get these first downs or effective yards out of it, how do you defend them? How are you able to kind of counterpunch this? Because a lot of teams are dropping safeties back for Allen anyways, because he's really an explosive deep shot kind of guy, that they're really not so concerned with the Bills running the ball. And then if the Bills do decide to run the ball effectively and you bring these people up, all of a sudden it's like, all right, heavy box, do we want to run it? Or do we want to just see if someone will get open up top of this? Which I think they could, because you have a couple of burners and a Stephon Diggs in your offense. This is where I'm getting like really excited for Allen, because I feel like when you talk about including this run game, that you might have Allen running less if you don't need him to run, on a designed play, but they could still be productive. And I think that could still, play into Josh Allen's confidence, make him a more effective, decisive decision maker as a whole, beyond just being a passer, beyond just being a runner, because he has more faith in the personnel around him to make a play. I don't have to carry the entire burden of this offense anymore. I know I have guys that I can give the ball to and can make something happen. Now there's a little less on my plate. Now I can focus, and now I can trust what's in front of me. Something I felt like played into whether you want to call it a slight regression or not, some of the woes in 2022. But Bruce, I do agree. You can't ask him to run less. Josh Allen's Josh Allen. But if you call the plays that don't allow him to run at all, unless he absolutely has to, I do think that's the fairest compromise. And I think that's a way that you could get the best of both worlds out of that situation.
And that's reflected in the stats. So if you look at Josh Allen's rushing, he had more rushes last year that were scrambles than ever in his entire career. He had more rushing yards that happened on scrambles than his entire year. If you give him options in the passing game, he'll have to scramble less. So these are things that if you want him to run less in the running game, like design run, then develop a power running game that doesn't revolve around your quarterback. If you want him to run less on pass plays, give him answers. Like give him answers at Ken Dorsey. I don't think it's a coincidence that Ken Dorsey's first year in a new offensive system, he scrambled the most. Like, I don't think that's unusual. The second highest amount of scramble yards he had in his entire career was in 2018 when he was a rookie. So it seems to me that when Josh Allen is new to an offensive system, that's when he scrambles the most. So it would make sense. It would track if you continue to progress, then it would make sense that those scrambles will go down because he'll know his options and he'll have them in the passing game where he won't need to.
And the best part about that is, like, again, we love Josh as an improvising player. We love the fact that he can scramble, that he is capable of doing this kind of thing. And I've been saying it. I sound like a broken record when I do say it, but I just find that the Bills' offense is at its best when these are want to, not have to type of plays. When you talk about Allen rolling right and maybe there isn't anything immediately, but Allen can extend a play, or you talk about maybe one of those quick passes that gets blown up and maybe Kincaid is covered over the middle just for that split second, someone penetrates and Allen can dodge the sack and keep himself upright for a little bit longer. We want that. Like that is valuable, but I feel like those are things that you could just back pocket in your offense. Not to say you won't run them, but to not lean on them as much and not expect the cape to come out for Josh Allen every 5 seconds. Because again, you look at some of the competitive offenses you deal with in the AFC just alone, right? So you look at Cincinnati. You can look at Kansas City. Kansas City, who didn't have a 1,000-yard rusher, but could still run the ball effectively and lighten the load on Patrick Mahomes. You saw it in full display in their playoff run when Mahomes hurt his ankle and was still able to be productive because they could move the ball, because they could take the ball out of his hands. You add in this power running offense for Josh Allen where it's effective, where you can run both types, gap zone, and then have them just burst forward, get people open in space, be able to get this ball forward by the run. I am telling you, that opens everything else up, alone with the fact that we now have a Dalton Kincaid who can be that easy button option, but also not just in 12 personnel, in all personnel when you need a slot option. And we aren't talking about Trent Sherfield enough, because I also feel like that is another great easy button option for Josh. That is another person that I feel like, beyond the running protection, is someone that has been an experienced and relatively productive slot receiver in the NFL. I am not saying that I think Trent Sherfield will be Cole Beasley, but I do think that they brought in all of these people, to go back to your point, Bruce, about just wanting to make things easier for Josh, to establish that we don't want you to do as much. We want you to have these choices because we feel that this will make you a better player this season and not make you have to force the ball as much, not make you have to feel like you have to run and give up the ball and maybe a fumble, which was a huge concern last season because he lost 5 fumbles in the regular season. And I counted him at 16 in the playoffs included, which that's not great. And that needs to be cleaned up. And that makes me want to kind of go into this next topic I want to talk with you, Bruce, is what are your true concerns about Josh this upcoming season? Because we're talking about all the ways he can be great, but bringing up fumbles and thinking about turnovers and thinking about some of the decision-making woes, in your eyes, what do you think is your biggest concern or set of concerns for Josh Allen this upcoming season?
My biggest concern is that the elbow and the first year of Ken Dorsey brought out a little bit more YOLO, and it's going to take a minute to bring it back in. I think that 2020 Josh was very in control. 2020 Josh had a lower ADOT. 2020 Josh had a good understanding of the concepts that were being run. He looked very in control. It was less explosive. It was less reliant on explosive plays. And I think that that was important. I think one of the things that's coming up right now in the comment section that we need to address, the Bills' offensive line was not amazing last year, but it wasn't like putrid. We need to talk about this, folks. Everyone seems to think that the Josh Allen was scrambling because the offensive line was putrid as a pass rushing. It's not true. The Bills' pressure rate allowed last year was 5th best in the NFL, and the pass block win rate was 4th in the NFL. These are both things that operate completely independent of Josh Allen scrambling to avoid sacks. We're not talking about that at all. So it was not putrid by any means. Now, Roger Saffold was not effective. We can talk about that and be very, very clear about that. But this offensive line was not putrid. No, we're having this issue where we're recalling the last thing we saw, which was against the Bengals, which was a terrible offensive line performance. And we are extrapolating that over the course of the entire season. We're just utilizing the last thing we saw, and we're just dwelling on it the entire offseason. And I agree that we probably got upgrade at offensive line this year, and I'm happy about that. But it wasn't like an abysmal offensive line. Like, oh my gosh, he was, bottom 5th in the NFL. It was 27th out of 32. It wasn't that bad, folks. Like, I know that Josh Allen is the golden goose, and I understand that Josh Allen is a really good quarterback, and it's been a long time since we had a really good quarterback, but it's not always somebody else's fault, right? Sometimes it's just Josh made a bad read. Sometimes it's Josh didn't know what he was looking at. Sometimes it's Josh didn't understand the play. Sometimes it's Ken Dorsey. Sometimes there's just a lot of things. It's not always just the offensive line was putrid, right? Now, could it be better? Sure. Yeah, it could be better. But objectively, nobody would look, if someone who's not related to the Bills fan and rooting for Josh Allen would look at the Bills offensive line and go, that's abysmal. Like nobody would if they looked at the entire tape of the entire season. So I think it's really important that we structure that appropriately with the conversations moving forward. Now, I went off on a tangent because there was too much of the comments were awesome and they were bringing up all these great points. I was like, I need to address this. I don't want to shy out of, I don't want this to not feel like a live show. You know what I mean? Because it's 100% comments for a reason. I want to do it. And I did that and then completely forgot your question because I went off on this tangent. So if we just circle back for a second, I swear I'll get to it.
I almost forgot it too, but basically just concerns about Josh Allen this season.
Okay,
but
so
I have to say this real fast, Bruce. I'm sorry. I just want to, because I agree with that point. And one point I want to add to that is just remember, when the team is reliant on deep shots too, that means Josh is holding the ball much longer. That means pressure is going to try and come in a lot faster. The fact that they're second at quick pressure rate is great, but also look at this, like, you have to understand it's just more of a deficit to be in general for an offensive line if your quarterback has to hold on to the ball. And again, Allen's not absolved here. I mean, I talked about it with Ann a few weeks ago, and he brought it up, that Miami game where everyone was blaming Dorsey, but there were some deep shots Allen take that were either the right read or he had someone wide open in the middle of the field and ignored them. Allen's decision-making is definitely something I will go into more, but I want to hear your point, Bruce. I apologize.
No, don't apologize. I'm the one who took it off track, and I only did it because we have an amazing active comment section I want to make sure I'm engaging with. I don't want to forget about people.
And keep them coming, guys.
So for me, it's the elbow and Dorsey's first year that have a tendency to derail it. That's my concern. My concern is that it's going to take longer to get Josh Allen back to peak 2020 Josh Allen because he slipped into some bad habits because of the elbow, and it's going to take him longer. He's talked a lot about this offseason about how his offseason strategy is just rest. It's just rest. And he's come back and he said, hey, it's working for me. When I come back, I test better than I did before because I got to rest. And for a guy who gets beat up as much as Josh Allen does, that makes sense. I totally get that. But you wonder if it's going to take him a little bit longer to get back into efficient, in control Josh, because before we had excuses. We had reasons, we had contributing factors for YOLO Josh, right? You had the elbow, you had Ken Dorsey, right? And that matters. Those are contributing factors. But once those contributing factors are changed, once you have the second year of Ken Dorsey, once you have a healed elbow, you need to go ahead and pull back. Right? You need to go ahead and get that ADOT down. You get the decision-making right. Make the correct decision. You need to do those things correctly. So my concern is that the sample size of YOLO got a little bit heavy, and it's going to take a little bit more time to really get back in the, okay, we're hyper efficient now, we're being surgical. I'd much rather people be surgical than explosive, because explosive goes both ways. Explosive is good. We love explosive. Explosive also blows up in your face, right? So let's get back to a little bit more surgical via 2020, Josh. And my concern is it's going to take a little bit longer to do that.
Agreed. And I think this gets talked about a lot, but Ken Dorsey kind of having the quarterback's mentality as an offensive coordinator, working with another equally as competitive, if not more competitive guy with Josh Allen. You have two alphas that are working together. That's like two big, giant, buff dudes in the gym yelling at the top of their lungs when they get a PR and wanting to go up, even though their legs are already shaking and they're about to pass out. That's how I view it. And when you talk about Ken Dorsey having to reel back in Josh Allen, I do think that is a valid concern amongst the fan base, amongst this team, because you do have to check your quarterback every now and then, right? And that's not just Josh Allen, that's everybody. The quarterback is the guy. He is the alpha of the team. He's your signal caller. He is the deliverer. If he is riled up, someone has to calm him down, get him mentally ready, because this is a long game with a lot of decisions to be made that should not be made when the burner is red hot. And Josh Allen is a red hot kind of quarterback. They have the nickname Sugar Rush Josh for a reason. There is a reason why teams know this about him and teams try to play into it. There's a reason why teams will change coverages. And when Josh Allen is just forcing deep balls, you notice they start adjusting for that. And that is a concern I have as well, Bruce. Josh has to be able to reel it back in. Josh has to have a more zen approach to the game. I am not saying lose your competitive spirit. I am not saying lose that fire that makes you who you are, but just tone it down a touch when things are starting to get messy. You don't need to force things. There's a lot of time. I even look at that Jets game that I was at in person and I saw it, where he had, I think it was 3 interceptions. These didn't need to happen. These interceptions were preventable. There are ways that you could just try to slowly maneuver the ball, get yourself a couple of yards, find the guy, your check down, get yourself a nice 5-yard pass, get some momentum going and build upon that. Because guess what? When that underneath methodical approach starts working, so too does your deep component. And those explosive plays do not become your reliance, but something that you can use when you want to, and they can be effective because you have the personnel to do it. However, when we talk about big concerns, my biggest concern, as I mentioned before, is ball security and decision-making. I said 2. I think I said 1, but 2. Ball security, because you watched that interview he did, Bussin' with the Boys, a few weeks ago. And Taylor Lewan told him one of the things teams game plan for when they play Josh Allen is roll to his left, which Eric already disproved that. So, make him keep rolling to his left. That's fine. And ball security. He doesn't protect the football. Josh Allen does not protect the football. And it's okay. You're allowed to say it. You're allowed to call him out. And when people argue against Josh Allen, they have every right to bring up his ball security issues. It is a very valid thing that needs to be addressed. Josh Allen is a warrior, again, an alpha, a red hot guy that wants to make a play happen. When he's running, he doesn't give a flying F about who's in front of him, what's in front of him. You could have a killdozer in front of him. He's running right at it with that football if it means there's a first down there. But that also makes him reckless. That also means that when someone gets behind him and knocks that ball out of his hand, bingo, that ball's out of his hand. And I talked about 5 lost fumbles in the regular season. For some reason, I couldn't find the playoff number. I don't know if you have it, Bruce, but
I can find it.
Yeah, I know for a fact there was one in Miami where he called the wrong protection. Singletary was in the wrong spot. He got completely blindsided. This was in the pocket, and he still lost the ball and gave up a touchdown. That's another example of this team and his ball security issues. This is something that Allen just simply needs to correct this upcoming season. And I think it's possible because when I talk about Josh Allen's flaws on the show, so I talk about when I talk about his turnover problems and I talk about his decision-making woes, which another issue, just very simply put, I think he could be a little bit better when it comes to reading his defenses, to not forcing things when he doesn't have to not get too hot-headed, as I alluded to before. These are preventable and correctable mistakes. We are not talking about a lack of talent here. We're not talking about something that you're doomed, right? Josh Allen, it has this mentality, but that does not mean you can't correct the decision-making and the turnover issues and the ball security. Again, you allude to 2020, a season that was Allen's best statistically, his best completion percentage, his most efficient metric. And that's doable. And I think, again, when we talk about what they're building this season and the easy buttons that they've added to the offense and the protection that they've added to the offense, and now you have Dorsey entering year 2 and has seen the worst and the best of Josh Allen. You can try to bring that to a happy medium where you're finding this balance of not asking him to have to run buck wild a bunch of times in a game, to be able to have this methodical death by 1,000 paper cuts offense where when teams start bringing people up, that's when you can have some fun. And Bruce, I don't know if you'll agree with this, but I feel like we saw that a couple of times this past season, mainly the Rams game, the Titans game, and one game that I think doesn't get spoken about enough, but that first New England game, where I felt like that was one of Ken Dorsey and Josh Allen's best games. From the approach that they were incredibly efficient, that they knew when to hand the ball off, that it felt like they were moving the ball at will, and while they didn't put up 35 points, they controlled that entire game. To me, that's it right there. And that's what you can be. And I think as long as you are giving Josh Allen these options, these, short routes that can get open, this zone breaker and Dalton Kincaid, these burners that can get you space and yards after catch, that will take the turnovers away. That will correct itself. And we will be talking about a much more efficient offense with less turnovers potentially in 2023. Bruce, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, so I went while you were doing that and I looked up the fumbles. So Josh Allen tied a career high in 16 fumbles in 2022. He had 3 against Miami and 0 against Cincinnati in the playoffs, just so you're aware. Mm-hmm. There's a conversation going on in the comments right now about Bills were second in quick pressure rate and they were top end in free rushers. Yes. Now we need to talk about this. Free rushers are the responsibility of the offensive coaching staff, the quarterback, and the coordinator, not the line. Sorry. We need to talk about this. So basic math. If you bring 5 rushers and we have 5 blockers, it's reasonable to expect you to not get a free rusher. If you bring 6 rushers and we have 5 offensive linemen, you're going to have a free guy. The question is simply, where is the free guy? And the quarterback needs to know that the free guy is on him. Ask any quarterback who calls any protections. The free guy is the responsibility of the quarterback. It is your job to either, number 1, make the guy miss in the pocket, or number 2, replace the body with the ball, right? That's a responsibility of the quarterback and the offensive coordinator. So free rushers is not necessarily an offensive line thing at all. In fact, most of the time it's not. Most of the time, if you see a free rusher, it's not the responsibility of the offensive line at all. Most of the time, it's a coordination problem. It's a quarterback calling protection wrong. He got fooled. He slid it wrong. Now, occasionally it's the center's problem because the center's the one calling protections. But in this offense with Josh Allen, it's Josh Allen. Mitch Morse is there to help him, but this is not an offense that relies on the center to call protections. Very often with rookie quarterbacks, the quarterback won't even really slide protections. The center will help him out and they'll kind of get him in the right direction. In a lot of offenses, the quarterback can't even flip runs early on. You won't flip runs. You can't call audibles. You can't do any of that stuff. So when it comes down to the free rushers, that actually reinforces the idea that it's not the offensive line. That doesn't lean more on the offensive line. That leans less on it. So it's really, really important that we wrap our head around that. When you see a free rusher, the overwhelming majority of the time, you should not think, wow, this is an offensive line issue. The overwhelming majority of the time, you should go back and rewind it and go, okay, how many rushers did we have? How many blockers did we have? And who should have made that call? As a general rule, when it comes to offensive line play, you want inside out, which means you're allowed to have a free rusher. You just want them on the outside, not on the inside. So if your free rusher comes from a linebacker in the middle, that's usually way worse than if your free rusher is a cornerback coming from the end. Your slot guy blitzes off the edge. If you have a call to make, you want inside out. The overwhelming majority of protections are inside out. So if you have 5 rushers coming and you have 5 blockers, nobody cares. If you have 6 rushers coming and you have 6 rushers coming and 5 blockers, you want the 5 most internal, the 5 most hash marked compressed players in order to be the ones that are blocked. And the one off the edge is the one you would like to leave unblocked. Number 1, it's easier for the quarterback to see them coming. Number 2, it's easier for the quarterback to make them miss. And number 3, it's easier for the quarterback to identify who they are and replace the body with the ball. So it's really important that we have this conversation because not all quick pressures are the responsibility of the offensive line. Now, sometimes they are. You mentioned Roger Saffold. RJ brings up Roger Saffold, right? There are plenty of examples on film of Saffold just getting his butt whooped right off the line. Like that's a real thing. That's a real phenomenon. And I don't want to sit here and tell people that what they saw with their eyes wasn't accurate, because that's a real thing that happened. But when you just take a step back for a second and just ignore that one play and think that there are hundreds and thousands of plays over the course of an entire year, and when you look at the grand scheme of them, not just that one thing that showed you that Saffold missed that guy, because that's a real thing, but that's not indicative of the entirety of the entire year. Mm-hmm. The overwhelming majority of the time, if you get a free rusher, we shouldn't immediately assume it's an offensive line issue, because a lot of times it's not. A lot of times it's, I don't quite understand the pressure that was coming. I thought it was going to be X, Y, and Z. It turned out it was A, B, and C. And this is where the offensive system comes. Now we come back to Dorsey again. You need to have answers installed that don't rely on, hey, Josh, can you just go be Superman for a minute? Like if Josh doesn't feel like he has to, then he won't need to. Right. And so that's something that Josh Allen's talked about all the time. So for me, Dick J asks, have you seen much tape on McGovern? Do we have to worry about him doing similar things? McGovern is a markedly better pass blocker than a run blocker. I feel much more comfortable with McGovern pass blocking than he is in run blocking. McGovern is not going to drive anybody like off the ball. He's a positional blocker. I think he's good mobility. I think he's good hand usage. I think he gets his hips around. But if you want someone who is going to, roll their hips into contact and drive people off the ball, that's not who McGovern is. I think you should consider McGovern to be a little bit more like Ryan Bates. Nobody with Ryan Bates has unbelievably good foot quickness. He always had a length problem coming out. There was question was whether he was going to be a tackle because of his foot quickness or whether he was going to be a guard because of his length problems. There was this whole thing about him when he was coming out of Penn State. It was a whole thing. But anyway, it's a conversation that is a little bit nuanced because we don't go back and watch the play. We're staring at the quarterback with the ball, and he gets a snap, and we see him with the guy in his face. And then we go, what the heck, offensive line? What are you doing? Because we're watching Josh Allen. And I'm not saying don't watch Josh Allen. By all means, watch the game the way you want to watch the game. But if you paused it and you rewound it for just a second and you just looked at it again, you would go, okay, one of the greatest books you can read is by Pat Kerwan. It's called Take Your Eye Off the Ball. It's one of the best books you can read to start football knowledge. And it's one of the best things you can do. It's just don't stare at the quarterback the whole time. And it helps with things like this. I realize I went off on an unbelievable tangent here. I am so sorry about that.
I love listening to it. You're good.
Absolutely amazing content that's helped generated by the awesome people in the comment section. So I want to make sure that I'm taking advantage.
No, we love our comment section. I make it a point to try and show as many people as I can. Sometimes I get a little too into the conversation, then I forget to throw people up. So that's my bad. But guys, first and foremost, before we continue on, because we're going to hit the final stretch of this, I want to say thank you again. Please, if you haven't already liked this video, check out everything on Cover One, like all the videos, subscribe, and also subscribe to Buffalo Rumblings and Bruce Exclusive as well, because this man, you want to hear more of this amazing content and what he is bringing to this show. You can hear it more when you check out his pod as well, which is fantastic. And it is just, Bruce, I was trying to find any sort of thing I would think to say that you didn't already said, and you covered it all. I will say, again, it just goes back to how watching football, it's kind of a thing where I see something, and I used to be guilty of prisoner of the moment, where it was I saw something happen, I blamed the line, that was my opinion, carrying it throughout the whole year. And I understand when people do have that thought, and I still sometimes have that problem. But I also, since a few years when I just started watching football more in depth and trying to look at it more in a more complex way, I realized that what you see isn't always what you get. There's a million reasons to something happening. Sometimes it's as simple as Josh made the wrong read. Sometimes it's as simple as Spencer Brown fell down or Roger Saffold took a play off when he was on the field. But then there's other times where it's, we set out 5, they brought in 6. The 6th rusher got free, and we didn't have an answer for it. Just wrong read by Josh, wasn't set up well, game over, bada bing, bada boom. And then you look at it and it's but also sometimes teams want that free rusher to come up because that means one less person in coverage. And then if you're baiting these guys to run 6 or even 7, like Miami was running more than 5 most of the time last season, especially in that playoff game. But that's also a big reason why you saw the team get more explosive, is because it's all right, you're going to send 7 up. That means someone's open down there. As long as I get that extra second to see it, I'm getting that ball out. it's okay sometimes for that to happen. And that's like kind of the thing with stats, and why like you can look at stat sheets and they're very informative, and it's what myself and a lot of people, is the basis of all of our discussion, but it doesn't tell the whole story, because maybe the free rusher was what they anticipated on the play so that they could get someone open in space and get some yards after the catch. Like, that doesn't get talked about enough. So when it comes to the offensive line, there are absolutely metrics that are valid and grades are valid, but to a point, because there is a lot of context that doesn't get discussed as well. With Josh Allen too, in a lot of his plays. Like, Josh Allen was a very highly rated quarterback this year. If you look at the ratings though, he was rated higher as a rusher than he was as a passer, which I thought was interesting. And honestly, probably fair, because it felt like, again, his passing became a bit one-dimensional. And again, we addressed the plenty reasons why that could have been the case, but it really was a bit more one-dimensional. And yeah, great deep ball, great explosive play. When a deep ball hits, it's efficient. It's getting you points. It generates a lot of yards. It's pluses in every metric. However, what doesn't get talked about is it a sustainable way to play when you go into a playoff game in Buffalo in January? And as we learned, it wasn't. That team had the answer. We got shut down. So I do completely understand it. And just real fast before we go on to the final topic of the day, I want to find this one really funny comment that had me giggling during the start of your point. Where is this? Oh, no, where is this? I don't want to lose it.
Do you want me to start talking about something random while you keep looking for it?
You whatever you want.
Okay, so you brought up a great point, and I want to make sure that I'm enforcing that. You mentioned offenses wanting people to have free rushers. That's a point we need to talk about. Now, we're not used to seeing this because the Buffalo Bills under Josh Allen have never been a good screen team ever. But if you look at teams that are really good screen teams, the entire premise around a screen is that there's a shift in leverage from a number standpoint. You end up with rushers that are upfield and blockers that are downfield, right? And it creates a leverage issue from a number standpoint. And we understand that that's the point when it comes to running a good traditional running back screen. We totally get it. Hey, that's the point. We're going to flip the leverage of the defense. And so we're going to end up with players who are behind the defensive line and blockers that are behind the defensive line to be able to out leverage them from a number standpoint. That's a big part of the entire premise of what a running back screen is. But yet somehow we think that every time there's a free rusher on a non-screen play, that it's the end of the world. So we get a free rusher on a screenplay, you go, oh, that's part of the design. But you get a free rusher on a non-screenplay, you go, oh my gosh, the world is ending. Well, you might not always keep, if you think you have 6 coming, you might not keep the running back in.
Mm-hmm.
You don't always want to have 6-on-6, 5-on-5, 7-on-7. You don't always want to have that. Sometimes if you think you have 6 rushers coming, if you have another answer within the confines of the offense, you go, you know what? Bring it. I'm going to pull Morpheus right here. I'm just going to stick my hand out and just bring you in. I want you to come in because I'm comfortable within the context of the play, knowing that I have Dalton Kincaid. I can replace the rush with the ball. I have Devin Singletary. I have James Cook. I have whatever it is in 2022 or 21 or 23 or whatever it is. I can replace the rush with the ball, and I can out leverage that extra 6th rusher. It's not always a bad thing. It's a bad thing if you don't have an answer. Right. That's when it's bad. It's not bad just having a free rusher. It's bad when you have a free rusher and you have no plan, or you have a free rusher and you didn't think you were going to. Yeah. That's when it's bad.
AKA that Miami turnover. That's a great example of it. The free rusher came from, I think it was the wrong side, or Singletary just wasn't assigned to protect. Singletary probably thought he was getting open in space, and then there was a free rusher and Allen just didn't see it.
Which is a miscommunication, or it's a Dorsey issue, or it's an Allen issue. It's always some sort of offensive function issue.
Yeah, and some of Allen's finest work has come from those, again, like baiting pressure. Like, I feel like that's a big part of how they play New England, because New England is a very good pass rushing team with very good free rushing ability. And yet it always seems like, yeah, they'll collapse the pocket a bit, but Allen is great at keeping plays alive. He'll step up in the pocket, make you bring your guys forward, and then just find someone open in the soft zone. Or you look back at a great example of this is that Washington game, 2021. They were getting to the backfield. Chase Young company, they were getting to the backfield. You saw Allen maneuver his way out, but that's exactly what they wanted, because there was always someone open in the middle of the field. And he spread the ball around. It wasn't to one guy consistently burning them. That was the plan. They knew your strength, the pass rush. They invited you to come home, but Allen's capable of getting open. Or even you look at sometimes with its free rushers, or even just rushing pressure and it actually gets through, misguidance, like getting people off balance, pushing people out of the way. Yeah, you might get past me, but if I throw you off just an inch, that's all I need because Allen's going to get that ball out. Like, it's just opening the discussion about Allen's ability to react to pressure and talking about the nuances of pressure and how it affects a quarterback and how sometimes you want it, because that just means that maybe the protection is, or I'm sorry, the coverage isn't as sticky, or maybe too many people came up and there's going to be a soft spot somewhere and I know where it is and I'm right. And it's not always right. And that's where we have the discussion of how much is it to blame on play calling? How much is it to blame on Josh Allen? How much is it to blame on the offensive line? And Bruce, I found the comment. I don't know why this had me giggling, but I had to mute my mic. I love Josh, ... But every time I see him this offseason, he's pounding beers and burgers.
I mean, here's what I want to say about that. When Brandon Beane drafted Josh Allen, what did he say? He said, this guy is Buffalo. That's what he said, right?
Yeah.
Are we surprised? Are we surprised by this? Josh Allen is here for a good time, not necessarily for a long time. You see it with the way he plays. You see it with his general demeanor. Josh Allen is a go big or go home, here for a good time, not for a long time. I would be surprised, to be honest, if Josh Allen's still playing football at 39 years old, at 40 years old. I would be shocked. I don't think it's a Cam Newton thing where it's going to flame out quite that fast, but I think Josh Allen is here for a good time, not for a long time. And I think that's part of what endears him to the fan base. And I think that there's still an opportunity for Josh Allen to, adjust a mindset if he wants to be different, but you can't really argue with the results. So I think that that's something to consider as well. Now, we've all seen people view their lives and careers differently as they get older,
Mm-hmm.
And so every offseason is an opportunity for Josh Allen to reflect on how he wants to do it. And I'm sure that the team is in communication with him about how they want him to handle the offseason and how they best want him to work and train moving forward. And we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Exactly. And again, that's the offseason. The season is over. He's a big proponent of rest. He probably doesn't care. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but I view it as I just played, let's call it 6 months straight of intense exercise and regular practice and probably being on a controlled diet and probably having a weight regimen that he has to follow to a T. That's exhausting mentally. I don't blame the guy if he wants to take a month or two out of his offseason and what's going to be a mostly athletic, busy football year to just relax, to take some time for himself, to eat normally, to be, I don't want to say normally because I'm a big proponent of trying to eat clean, but eating and just enjoying life and just trying to get the little normalcy you can get as a star quarterback in the NFL. That really doesn't bother me. And I think the Tom Brady diet that everyone knows and loves, and the reason that you see that and then you see him prolonged into his 40s, and I absolutely believe that his diet had a big part to do with that. And the fact that Tom Brady, has the accolades he has, people will see this and think every quarterback has to do the same. Is it nice if they do? Sure. But I also think there's more reasons than just diet that Tom Brady is as successful as he was. And I think it's okay if Josh Allen wants to enjoy a burger and a beer at dinner every now and then. But during the regular season, when you need to be, in good shape, when you need to be at your mental toughness to your peak, everything. Yeah. I would like to see, maybe more emphasis on training, maybe more emphasis on that stuff, but it's not my life to live. And again, Bruce, you said it. The results speak for themselves. If Josh is playing well, I don't give a damn if he's pounding 20 wings every night. If it works for him, it works for him. And if he's not getting hurt, he's not getting hurt. And this comment right here, actually, real fast, let me go ahead and find this. There was something that someone brought up right here. Yes, spin. Because running the ball more won't protect his UCL more if you can't protect when they pass, and the Bills are a pass-happy team. So I know I agree with this, but there's something I also want to bring up is that when we talk about Allen's running, really the injuries that Allen's faced in his career have come from pocket injuries against Houston in 2018.
Both the elbow injuries.
Both of the elbow injuries came from inside the pocket. So that's something that I've always been fascinated by, because there is this narrative that when Allen runs, we have this concern about Allen getting hurt, and rightfully so. It takes one cheap shot. It takes one bad hit to the ribs, to the leg, to the knee for something to go wrong. But both of his elbow injuries came from inside the pocket, which is why I think it's also something I want to stress, and tell me if you agree with this, Bruce, that it's not that we don't want Allen to stop running. We obviously like the fact that he runs and we want him to protect himself. But do you think there is some sort of, I guess you could call it overly cautious nature, not just from the fans, but maybe with the coaching staff about running? And should we be as worried about Josh Allen running and maybe his health to boot?
I think they worry about cumulative pounding, because I think that we can talk a lot about individual injuries, and that's 100% a true statement. The idea that quarterbacks get hurt more often in the pocket than they do when they're running, that's backed by stats and factual data. You cannot argue otherwise. You can't. You can argue it, but you're wrong. It's that simple. Quarterbacks get hurt more in the pocket than they do when they're running. I think people worry about the cumulative hits on players because they see the effects of cumulative hits on running backs. I think that's what they're looking at. They're looking at players who have short lifespans in the NFL, specifically running backs. Why do running backs have a shorter lifespan? Is it because they're lesser athletes? No, it's because they get hit every single time they touch the ball. That's the reason why. Every single play that they don't run out of bounds, they're getting hit. And so when you look at a quarterback and you think, okay, every time he runs over the middle of the field and he doesn't slide, he's going to get hit. And those things matter. They build up over time, and it has a tendency to shorten your career, because a human body is just not built to get smacked around that much. It's just not. The reason why running backs hit the wall at 29 or 30 and wide receivers can go to 33 or 34 is because Marvin Harrison never took a hit in his freaking life. Marvin Harrison would run a 3-yard out route, get it, and go down. One of the things I've always really appreciated about Stephon Diggs is that Stephon Diggs will catch the ball and immediately he makes a value proposition. If there is one guy to beat, Stephon Diggs will fight tooth and nail to get that first down. If there's more than one guy, Stephon Diggs goes, yeah, I'm out. And he just goes down.
Yeah.
What a tremendous risk assessment historically by Stephon Diggs. Josh Allen could learn something about risk assessment, because Josh Allen's never met a guy he doesn't want to run over. So I think that's what they worry about. They worry about the cumulative effect of hit after hit after hit, even though we all know that the most significant injuries happen in the pocket. Like that's where they happen. Like, it's not debatable. I think people just look at running backs and they go, okay, a small amount of that running back effect is going to happen to my quarterback if he doesn't stop running the ball over the middle of the field and getting hit. You run the ball out of bounds, you run out of bounds, do the Aaron Rodgers thing where you run out of bounds and kind of jog and stick the ball out, right? Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, how they stick the ball out right before, get that extra yard, that savvy veteran move. We all want to see that from Josh Allen, but he's sitting there going, if I cut up field, I can get another 2 yards.
And he does. That's the thing he does. That's almost the problem, is like, he's so good and so explosive that, like, when he has that itch to do it, he'll do it. He'll pull it off. The leaps, like a hurdling of a linebacker in the NFL shouldn't exist, but he actually can do it. And it's almost like you love it, but you almost hate it, because it's like, oh, dude, are you really? But also, like, that was kind of sick. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's frustrating in that regard. I had to make cumulative pounding the thing, by the way. That was just a beautiful arrangement of words. That's hilarious.
Cumulative pounding. Yeah.
Cumulative pounding. That's perfect. And I got to find the spin comment, because this is great. And I keep thinking he's saying alien, because the capital L and the lowercase L makes it look like an I. When Allen runs, he can brace for impact because of the hits. When he is in the pocket, he is either blindsided by the hits or just has to stand in there and take the hit head on to get a throw off. Yeah. Boom. That's it. That's the reason right there. And again, I think Allen can slide. Again, this is going back to my topic about our concerns about him, talking about things that he can improve on. And where I have so much optimism about Josh Allen, and Bruce, this will be our final topic for today. It's just, he is the kind of person that I feel like when you talk about the problems he has as a quarterback, when you talk about the things that he can correct, they can be corrected, and they can be corrected simply. And I know that sounds like a bright-eyed thing to say, but you think about something like a turnover. Why did you throw that ball there? I shouldn't have thrown that ball there. All right, so you realize you made a mental error. We can clean that up. We can figure something out. Hey, you fumbled the ball there. Yeah, I wasn't protecting the ball, so protect the ball. Like, those are things that Allen, again, if he's running an open space and needs to get down first, can do. Or, oh my God, Diggs is double covered. I can't force this ball. I shouldn't do it. I'm not going to do it. We can improve upon that. And that's where, for me, I get optimistic about Josh Allen going into this season, and where I think he will improve, and why I think we're going to see might even be an MVP campaign from Josh Allen this season is because, again, to cover some of the things we talked about in this episode, Bruce. We talked about the people they've added, his interior line, the receiving options, the people that are there to make his life a little bit easier. We talked about the fact that Ken Dorsey is going to enter year 2. And we're talking about the fact that Josh Allen will actually be healthy. His elbow will be healed, and we can see this dynamic type of offense from him. So, Bruce, before we sign off today, I just want to ask your final thoughts on this matter. Anything you feel like we didn't address that you'd like to talk about, or anything you just want to say about Josh Allen?
I can't think of anything we didn't talk about regarding Josh Allen. We talked about a lot today.
Yeah.
We went over, and a big part of that's my fault. So sorry about that. But
never apologize.
Here's my thing: we can get nitpicky, and we should talk about stuff, and we should be very willing to talk about the idea that Josh Allen is a flawed player. They all are. Everyone's a flawed player. Everyone has things they could do better, and we should be willing to talk about that. We shouldn't get to the spot as a fan base where Josh Allen can do no wrong. No player should ever be a sacred cow. Like they shouldn't be that way. So make sure that we understand that, but also let's just enjoy it, man. Let's acknowledge it and let's be okay with it. So listen, I've been married to my wife for a long time. I love my wife. My wife is my favorite person on the planet. She's my best friend. Someone recently asked me for a non-spousal emergency contact, and I literally didn't know who to talk. I had no idea. I don't have a non-spousal emergency contact because she's my best friend. We do everything together. I do not operate in a world where I believe that she is perfect. I don't think it's healthy for me to do that. She doesn't operate in a world where she believes that I am perfect. I think that that's a healthy mindset, but daggone, I wouldn't trade her for anybody. And I think that it's a mentality that we need to get in when we have elite players like this, where we need to just enjoy having an elite player and simultaneously acknowledge that he can be elite and amazing and spectacular to watch. And we are in the good days. Great line from the ending of The Office says, I wish there was a way to know that you were in the good old days before you left them. Folks, we're in the good old days now. Please, I beg of you, enjoy it. Acknowledge the fact that this is not a perfect team. Sean McDermott's not a perfect coach. Josh Allen's not a perfect quarterback. Stephon Diggs isn't a perfect. No, perfection does not exist. It's not a thing. It's never going to happen. But daggone, it's a lot of fun. And it's supposed to be fun. Let's just have fun. It's never been easier as a Buffalo Bills fan to have fun in recent memory than it is now. So let's just do it.
Firmly agree. And I think that you bring up that idea, like the sacred cow conversation. I think it's interesting because when we look at pro athletes to us are idols. Like, not just idols as in I look up to them. Idols as in, like, people kind of look at them like sacred figures, like religious figures. I know that sounds insane, but hear me out. When you look at people on your TV screen that you never met in person, and all you're seeing is them as an athlete, and you're seeing the good in them, and then you see these very optimistic posts about them on social media and optimistic interviews, you're seeing all of the good of this person. And when the bad happens, you develop this kind of attachment to them where you don't want any criticism or anything to affect them. It's this idolization of these human beings. And Josh Allen has become that for the Bills fan base, and I understand why there's admiration and adoration. Guys, I'm wearing his freaking jersey, by the way. I don't want to sound like I'm being a hypocrite here, but like Josh Allen is a tremendous athlete. I love that he's our quarterback. I think he's a great quarterback, and I think that he does incredible with what he's had. His ability to throw deep, short, the ability to run. He can be the best quarterback in the league when he's at the top of his game. I love watching him, and I'm so happy he's our quarterback. But he is not without criticism. And that is for our fans to discuss, and that is for everyone to discuss. It is okay to look at your favorite athletes, to look at Josh Allen and say, this was wrong. He shouldn't have done this. This was a mistake. Hold him accountable, because honestly, I think you lose a lot of stress and a lot of strife in your football viewing, your football watching, when you are able to remove those kind of pedestals you put these athletes on or put your team on. And this is something I say when we talk about like the AFC East. Like, I hate the Dolphins. I hate the Jets. I hate the Patriots. But I also am fully willing to embrace and talk about the things they're good at, because football is fun. Because it's a sport. It's a game that we all watch. And when it comes to that or Josh Allen, it's okay to criticize your quarterback and do it in a healthy way, to know that it doesn't change the fact that he's still a fantastic elite quarterback that can do all these things, and the guy that I want to be the signal caller for this team going forward. and maybe even winning a Super Bowl for them. I hope so. But all in all, Bruce, that's the point that we have to make. And I'm glad you brought it up. Just have fun. Let's have fun this season. Let's get ready to watch a really exciting team perform really well against some really tough competition. Let's be willing to hold Josh Allen or the powers that be accountable, but let's also be willing to embrace the fun that we're having. It's stressful to be a good team, and we haven't really experienced it in a long time until Allen came along. But now we can enjoy it, and let's enjoy it before the days come where we can't really enjoy it anymore, because I know that will happen someday. Bruce, I hope it's when Josh Allen's 40 and not, whatever year it could be. We won't know until it happens, but embrace the good times. They're here, and let's have some fun this season. And on that note, that is the end of this week's discussion. This was a ton of fun. Bruce Nolan, again, thank you so much for taking time out of your Saturday to be here with me to discuss Josh Allen. I know every time you're on the show, it's always a pleasure, and I love the rants. I don't want you to ever feel sorry for it. I want to hear your thoughts, and when you bring them here, it's an honor, honestly, to hear it. So, Bruce, tell me what you got going on. Tell the fans what you got going on, where they could find you, what you got coming up.
If for some reason you listened to this show and thought, that guy, definitely want more of that guy, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Threads at Bruce Exclusive. You can find my show, The Bruce Exclusive. It drops as a podcast, not as a live show, every Thursday morning on the Buffalo Rumblings podcast network. I also write for them. And the answer to RJ's comment in the Threads, did Bruce just compare Mrs. Nolan to Josh Allen? They both look amazing in shorts. So yes.
Amazing, man. Yes, once again, thank you. So all of you in the chat today that were contributing, thank you so much. I apologize if I wasn't able to bring your comment on the screen. Thank you for taking time out of your Saturday to be here today, to join the discussion, to watch us live. I truly, truly appreciate your time. To all of you with the kind words on the YouTube comments or in the chat, you guys are very much appreciated in my eyes and in the eyes of Cover One. Please, if you haven't, subscribe to the One Pass It. The link is in the description or at the top of this comment section. If you want to get some premium content from Cover One, join the Slack channel. That link is available for you to purchase now. You can subscribe to this channel. You can like all of our content. It is greatly appreciated. Likes are what makes the world go around. But for me, my name is Joe DeRosa. Again, on Twitter, you could find me at show_DeRosa. I tweet about everything from sports to random stuff that no one cares about. And actually, Bruce, before we sign off, I have to ask you about one thing. I have to ask you about this because I know you've tweeted about it. So I just beat Tears of the Kingdom. Have you beat Tears of the Kingdom?
I got a ton of the way through. I am literally on the final mission, which is defeat Ganondorf, and I chose to stop because I don't want it to be over yet.
I did the same thing.
I literally stopped and said, I'm going to come back to this. So I literally stopped, and I don't want the game to be over. So I stopped it. I went over. I'm playing some other games. I'm going to come back to it later, probably like 6 months, a year from now.
Oh my God.
I did the exact same thing with Breath of the Wild. I finished Breath of the Wild in 2020.
Oh my God.
And I got 99% of the way through of it in 2017.
Okay, so you did all the side quests and everything.
Oh yeah, I did. I've done a ton of stuff. I got in Tears of the Kingdom, I got the Master Sword. I did all the glyphs. I did, I've done 100. I did like 150 shrines or 128.
Did you do the? Did you get the Fierce Deity armor?
Not yet. No.
You got to get that. Trust me, it'll help you. Oh my God, that makes me so happy because I did the same thing. I got to the final quest and I was just doing side quests because I did not want the game to end. I don't know why I'm plugging this on the show right now. That's about the Buffalo Bills. If you guys play Switch, buy Tears of the Kingdom. It's legitimately one of the best games I've ever played in my life. That's not an exaggeration. I'm not saying that as prisoner of the moment. It's objectively like a borderline perfect game. I could find one thing I'll criticize about it and everything else is immaculate. But Bruce, I'm glad we got to talk about this live. Thank you again. And for all of you, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate all of you. I will be back next week with another episode on a training camp preview as we will look at some of our favorite matchups and what to be excited for as we enter training camp in St. John Fisher. You have all been wonderful. You are all amazing. Please tune in next week. I'm excited to see you. Thank you for your input again. Bruce, again, thank you. And that is a wrap, everybody. Again, you can find me on Twitter at show_DeRosa. Have a happy Saturday. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Stay safe. And as always, go Bills.